Hi, Jacqueline. How are you?
Doing great. My stomach's full. Great to see you again, Alistair.
So you're going to introduce our next speaker, but did you know he's actually the person that helped to make our code of conduct clear and straightforward? Obviously, we take comportment and conduct on the platform and at any of our events very seriously, but those codes of conduct can be kind of like wading through molasses. And so he actually offered to help us make it a little more clear and concise.
Well, he did a great job. I read your code of conduct. I loved it. Very clear. So let's launch into this afternoon. As I mentioned before lunch, we have some great talks this afternoon. We're going to be talking about things on design, on hiring, and on effective policies. So first up, as Alistair alluded to, we have a consultant and author, Louis Eisen, with us to talk about better policy writing in the digital age. Welcome, Louis.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Hello, everybody. I'm going to start actually by showing you the sign at my doctor's office, okay? You walk in to the office, and this is what you see on the wall. It's a little hard to read, so let me expand that. Pretty harsh, huh? You know, we understand that everybody needs rules, and we're going to have a need for rules and policies and directives going forward. The question is, how do we draft these rules in a way that doesn't get people to put their backs up? You know why I got into this field? I'll show you. I worked at a number of organizations around the government of Canada. So I was a lawyer first, and I was an IT consultant for 20 years, and then 17 years with the government, and 10 of those were in information management. And in one of these organizations, I don't want to mention because I don't want to draw attention particularly, one of these organizations, I started work, and my staff came up to me and said, we have a terrible problem. We have policies and nobody's following them. They don't listen to us. They don't like us. They're not doing what we told them to do in the policies. So I looked at the policies, and they were full of lots of very strict words like always and never and must. You must this and you must that. Lots of bold and underline and italics and sentences in all capital letters with lots of exclamation marks. I actually couldn't figure out why we needed so many exclamation marks, but I think it was the number of exclamation marks represented how many lashes you would get if you broke that rule. But I realized at that time that rules have a tone of voice. And rules, policies are very misunderstood. They end up being confrontational, being made in an us against them mentality, and that's not what rules are about. And over the course of the next few days, we're going to be looking at all kinds of issues that require new rules, artificial intelligence, ethical problems, new technologies. And the question is, how do we develop and implement these policies in a way that engages people? So that's what I'm going to talk about. I have to tell you, I follow Pia's lead here. People do not follow policies. They follow culture. Culture is far more important. And if the policy says go right, but the culture is in the organization, we all go left, guess what? Everybody left. There is no number of exclamation marks you can put after a policy that says go right, which will change the culture. Policies support your efforts to change a culture and to move the organization forward, getting used to new tools. They don't cause it. They're not the hammer. So given that they're a support mechanism, I want to look at what's the best way first to phrase them, second, how to put them as solutions, and then thirdly, how to position them among the rest of the items in the organization. I'm going to show you a comparison policy, and because it's hard to see things in our own area, I'm going to start with an HR example. It's just a little easier to see. And the question I'm going to ask you, there's going to be a one on the left and one on the right. One on the left is very harsh. The one on the right is much nicer. How are the people on the left feeling as they write that? I want you to read between the lines, not during the chat. So feel free to enter items in the chat because I will get them as we go through this. So there you go. There's one on the left and there's one on the right. Now, clearly, if I were to ask you what was going on at this office on the left to make them word policies like that, I think that's pretty easy. We get too many requests that aren't recognizing the 1 week notice. Okay, that the policy on the left asks for a week notice. The policy on the right does. Policy on the left also asks you to buy into the threat and the attitude. So my question is, what's the attitude? What's the emotion? How are these people feeling about what's happening? And please just throw that into the chat. If you look at the policies that you have, it's very easy to see what emotions people are feeling. And in the era of open government, where your policies not only sit internally, but are now out there for the world to see, everybody will know it, not just you. So if in fact this organization has a problem with people following this particular rule, everybody knows it. I agree. I'm still reading things like the people are feeling frustrated. They're feeling they have to be hard. They have to be irrelevant. They're feeling irrelevant. They're not feeling respected. You know what happens to policy writers? If they don't have proper enforcement tools and they need to make a policy harsher, all they have are words. So they just add more words and more words and more words. Problem is that the policy we're being asked to buy in here, on the left, you're being asked to buy into a 7-day leeway and to the threat and to the pissy attitude. And that's a much harder buy-in. So the next question is a little harder, and that is, where did they learn to write like that? That is, when they found people aren't following the rules and they need to make the rules sound tougher, where did they learn that? I'm seeing a number of answers in the chat, and I think you're all correct. You're reflecting the feeling, the emotion comes through, even though it's not written explicitly. Most of us learned to make rules from our parents and our teachers. Sit up straight, stop fidgeting, and don't let me catch you doing that again. What we learned growing up was that rules should sound bossy. They should sound like I make them and you are to follow them. Now, in fact, just so you know that I don't blame everything that went wrong in my life on my parents. I think what my parents were modeling is how adults in charge make rules for children they're responsible for, not how adults make rules for other adults on the same level. And that's a very different skill. It's a skill that most people who write policies don't learn first. I mean, it's not a hard skill. It's not rocket science. It takes a couple of days, but it is a skill to learn. How do you couch policies in a way that engages people? And it would have been really nice if my mom had said, you're not getting any dessert unless you eat your vegetables. But when you grow up and you have guests, don't say that tone of voice. But she didn't. And again, I'm not to blame my mom, but most of us grow up with that notion that when it comes time to make rules, we stay the rule, you follow it. You must obey. And I'll show you what it looks like in the IT environment. There's an example of a rule that is just as strict on the left. The frustration of the people on the left is just as easy. Just as easy to see. I have to tell you, I've given this talk a number of times. I've been pushing this sort of softer policy approach for a while. And my best friend is a policeman. And the first time he heard me give this talk, he went, yeah, right. He said, that might work for some organizations. I mean, some organizations might like that touchy-feely approach, but that would never work in a police force. That isn't going to work at DND. We're paramilitary. We're hierarchical, command and control. The rule better show that it's serious or nobody's going to follow it. Yeah, I know there are people who think that way, that the rule has to sound serious, but is that true? From my perspective, the strictest laws in any country are the criminal laws. The laws against murder, kidnapping, treason, you know, the not nice stuff. How are those laws worded? I mean, do they say people must never kidnap one another? Murdering others is absolutely not tolerated. No exceptions will be made. Now, that's not how they're worded. Let me show you how criminal laws are worded across the country. That's the law against murder. Very simply, anyone who commits murder is guilty of an offense and will be sentenced. There's no promotion, there's no condescension, nobody's wagging their finger at you. Look at this one for robbery. Same thing. A person who commits robbery is guilty of an offense and liable to imprisonment of this length or this length. It's pretty uniform, actually, across the English-speaking world that all these laws are written in a very matter-of-fact tone of voice. Govern yourself accordingly. Here's the way we do things in this country. A person who commits robbery is guilty of an offense. The word must hardly ever appears in these types of prohibitions, and yet everybody manages to believe that the government is serious about them. So we have a very absurd situation now. In this country, among government and private industry, and in other countries, and we're not limited to us, where the strictest laws for the most heinous crimes in the country were more respectfully than the policies that come out of many organizations. In fact, you know, if you just went by the tone of voice, you could be forgiven for thinking that murdering your boss is not half as serious a problem as not putting the documents in the corporate repository. Because, boy, you should hear what that rule sounds about not putting documents in the corporate repository. So what's going on? It's not that we have a bunch of megalomaniacs or we have mean people. What we have are people who are writing policies that aren't reader-centric. Tone of voice is not on people's radar. When I teach policy workshops, the people who come say, well, I don't want to write it like this, but my boss says I have to. Or this is the way the precedents come to us from in the organization. They all sound like this. Yeah, you know what? We did a lot of precedents that started from years and years ago, and they come in the language of old time. I mean, remember this, this little sign here? There was a time when bosses spoke to their employees in this tone of voice, and they wrote to their employees in this tone of voice. Today, no boss talks to their employees in this tone of voice. But a lot of them are still using it to write. They haven't caught up yet in the writing. The real bad part of this is that this sign hangs over the receptionists. So they wear it. It makes it look like they are the mean, nasty people who are ready for a fight. And it has nothing to do with them. This policy, this rule comes from the people above, but sitting in front of the receptionists, they wear it. You may not think of it this way, but your policies, your IM policies, IT security policies, they form part of the employee experience at the organization. And if you deal with customers, they form part of the customer experience. The same way harsh wording in HR policies or finance policies affects your experience as an employee, harsh wording in IT and IM policies affects their experience as employees. Part of our creating an experience is a commitment to create and maintain a respectful workplace. It does really make a difference. You find the Policy Hub at the RCMP headquarters started approaching things in this sort of softer manner. And in 6 months, the director said to me, you know, we're getting thank you notes. This is so much more of a collaborative exercise now, making these rules. It's not us against them. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. And that is how you temper the language and the rules. Well, the second thing is, how do you offer rules as solutions? So I'm going to tell you, you know, that book you saw on the first slide just came out in 3rd edition on how to write rules people want to follow. And I wanted to make a Kindle version. Okay. And you may know from Kindle that some of the older devices are monochrome, the sepia or black and white. So what comes out printed in the book, which is black but highlighted strong burgundy sections to highlight things, you can't use that color in Kindle. So Kindle could have done this wrong. They didn't do it this way, but they could have done it wrong. So I move over here. There. They could have said, this is our policy. You need to use one of these colors. Now, if they had done this, I think the reaction would have been the same that my reaction would have been, which is, first of all, could they find 5 uglier colors if they tried? And second of all, do the designers have any idea what they're doing over there? But they didn't do it like that. They actually did it very cleverly. They started this way. Here is our policy. When choosing colors, we conform to W3C recommendations for a readable contrast. Well, of course, how can I disagree with that? Absolutely, I buy into that policy. You've now got me hooked. I think this is a great policy. We are trying to conform to recommendations for accessibility. Then they said, continued, here's how you do that. And they fed me what, in fact, is a very technical explanation. This is the RGB formula, and you work all this out and figure out what acceptable value would work in. And this is rather technical for a lot of people, but it is the formula that they use. And at this point, as an author, I say, you know, could you just show me the colors that would be acceptable? And then I see this, which is exactly the same information they started with, but I buy into it. This doesn't say you must use these colors. This says our policy is that we buy into contrast recommendations from the W3C. I can buy into that. Too often, we have really good policies. And instead of telling people the policy, we tell them the rules underneath without a justification. In other words, we know we want to take the organization from here to there. And because we know our field and we're specialists, the best way to go from here to there is to go straight, make a right, make a left, and a left. So the policy says, you must go straight, go right, go left, go left. That's our policy. Well, no wonder people resist. That's not your policy. That's a how-to. Your policy is that we want to take the organization from here to there. And that we is so important. You know, policies that are worded things like employees must not take home external devices without permission. Well, nobody can take home external devices without permission. But the way it's written divides the group into rule makers and rule followers. That we is so important. One of the things in that code of conduct, if you want to read it, notice again, is it's all worded in the first person plural. This is what we believe. And that's important because as you push your values forward and as you try to change the culture, if your policy says, you know, we believe that we take all steps required to protect the privacy of an individual's personal information, if somebody doesn't believe that, they don't belong in the organization, because that's a fundamental value that your organization has adopted. So it's very easy to get the people up front to buy in if you can word your policy properly, if you can word it as a goal that people are prepared to buy into. Okay, the third thing I want to talk then is how does this relate to policies all across the organization? I've heard people think they have to have a digital policy now. Oh, we need a digital policy. We need a we've got all these digital things happening, so we need to get them all together and put a digital policy in place. Well, I have to tell you, from my perspective, having a digital policy is a little bit like having a policy for red things. Look at all the red things in the office. We need a policy for that. Oh, lots of red things. Why don't we just collect all the information we need about red things and put them together? The same thing happened with COVID, where people decided they needed a COVID policy. The same thing happened when cannabis became legal a year and a half ago, and people decided they need a cannabis policy. If you asked any of the policy experts, they would tell you that they have a robust policy system, and most government organizations do. you have everything in place that you need already, and it needs tweaking. That is, you can handle almost anything the digital world can throw at you by viewing the issues through the lenses of the policies you already have. Do we have privacy concerns? Let's look at the HR policy and say, what implications are there for privacy concerns on this policy? We're going to be introducing some AI somewhere in the organization. That might have implications for other areas. What implications does this have for the finance policy? What about for the service policy? And in most cases, you will find that simply by adjusting those policies, you can cover most of the information that you need to cover. And I'm going to show you a good example of that, because I was an organization, one of the departments I was at, their facilities group had this as a policy. You see, number one, their rule basically says each branch you charge with taking care of, maintaining, inventorying, managing, safeguarding, etc. You have to take care of this information. Of this assets. And the assets were described above. They include furniture, equipment, real property, etc. Well, the group was trying to put together an information management policy. And they also wanted people to maintain, inventory, manage, safeguard, and dispose. So all they really had to do was to go to the facility policy and say, let's make sure people understand that information holdings are assets. And that would have covered half of what they were trying to put in a brand new policy. The block to that was not a policy writing block. It was a silo block. It was a notion from the facility side that says, we don't deal with information. That's not our problem. That's yours. You write the policy. And the notion from the information side that said, it's our policy. Why should they talk about it? Why should we let it be in there? But no. All these policies are everybody's. So if we're going to have an integrated policy suite, we need to be able to work with each other and adjust all our policies for implications of what's coming. And if you're dealing with something like technology, which is pervasive, and digital, which is pervasive, I wouldn't set up a digital policy necessarily. I think I would go and deal with the digital issues in each of the other policies. That way, that group can take some ownership of those issues and understand that you're assisting them rather than putting roadblocks down, which is the way most people see the policies. Now, you know what? I understand that very often we inherit the policy suite, and a lot of you have inherited some policies that are really tough to work with. You've inherited what I think is a parking lot full of cars that nobody bothered to draw the white lines on the parking lot first. So cars are scattered all over the place. Your policies are so disorganized. You know, I've seen pizza toppings that are more organized than some of the policy suites out there. And the only way to fix that is to get all the cars off the lot, paint the lines, and then you can bring the cars back on. We have a big job in front of us. The bottom point, is still that rules are not about me telling you what to do. Rules are about us supporting the culture that we want to have moving forward. Even the notion of compliance is a little bit misleading, because compliance says, well, I say it and you comply. You know, we don't want compliance. What we want is cooperation. We want to move the culture forward, and we want your cooperation to help us do it. And we need your cooperation not just with the rules we set, because I think that's pretty well understood. But in this era where we're dealing with all kinds of new technologies and things we haven't explored before, we want your cooperation as we go through the learning curve, because we're going to stumble with it. And what a difference that makes. And, you know, this whole conference started out this way, with a very gracious host saying to us, you know what? We've got a learning curve. We don't have all the answers. Come on, please, you're going to work this out with us. Please be forgiving. That's the same for policy approach. It's if you go forward with your policy on the basis that we have all the answers, we know what it is, here are the rules, you're going to get the same pushback that we see now against some of the COVID policies that are coming out, because nobody has all the answers and nobody knows all the rules. But the policies make it seem like they do. I think policy making is a collaborative field, not a confrontational one. If there are any questions that have come up, Jacqueline, I'm happy to look at them. Otherwise, I'm happy to sing a song for the next few minutes. But is there anything particular people talked about?
So Lewis, first of all, fantastic. I love your parking lot analogy, and you did get a lot of questions in the chat. I've been following along here. I was asking you to rewrite your mask policies for how would you write a policy if people wear masks, but apparently you've already written a blog post about that, which someone already shared in chat. So I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. And if anybody has questions in chat, I'm also watching it, so feel free to chime in. But selfishly, I'm going to ask my own, which kind of parallels some of what people ask. There's a problem with enterprise sales, which is that the young upstart puts together a sales contract that's really simple. You know, pay me $5 a month and we're done. And then something happens, someone shares the password. So now they add a paragraph that says passwords may not be shared. Right. And then 5 years in, that vendor now has a contract that's 20 pages long. And some new startup comes in and goes, here's my simple terms of service. And everyone flocks to the new one because they make it so much simpler and easier. This happens in the private sector much more than you would believe. At what point does it make sense to refactor things? Because it sounds like what you just talked about, redrawing the lines, you know, silo integration, recognizing that something's new. It seems like digital, we've just gone from parking lots to airplane runways. Like painting some new lines isn't going to help. How do we know it's time to do that big refactoring? And then what practical steps should someone take when you're doing that kind of organizational wide refactoring of policies?
Very good question, Alistair. And actually, we need to distinguish, or the answer, we need to distinguish between contracts and policies, because they're not the same thing. Contracts are documents that set out people's rights and responsibilities and are necessarily confrontational. You don't care if the people on the other side think the contract is written in warm, fuzzy language, or if they feel that, you know, somehow you're asking them to engage. That's not what a contract is about. It's to protect parties. Policies, on the other hand, policies are about how the organization does things. And it's no badge of honor to have 5 books of policies to telling everybody how to do, you know, how to work everything. If you, in fact, could just write a book, and I tell this for small business, put away your policies, put your vision down, write your vision, write what you'd like to see. It's the same person running and is going to approve what the policies are. That's what's important for people. What would you like to see? What do you want to set? And don't think of them in terms of rules.
So one of the things I paraphrased from the amazing your work did helping us with the code of conduct, I just on the web page for the lobby, I just said, don't be a jerk. If you see someone being a jerk, call them out or tell us, right? Which is like the very high level TLDR. Mm-hmm. It often occurs to me that the books of policies come about because of the cacophony of special interests, that everybody thinks about. You know, you said, hey, you can write a simple policy that'll handle 80% of things. But where policies get long is where we start to add all these edge cases and exceptions and so on. Do you have any recommendations for ways of saying, look, this policy covers 95% of things, and our policy about the exceptions is the following, and sort of delegate? How do you handle it not becoming a cacophony of special interests?
Actually, I start from the other way around. That is, you know, when you're at university, you used to write a paper, and you might write a sentence and you say, I know this is true, but if I don't quote an authority, the prof is going to ding me on it. Well, that policy should be written, really. You start with your office manual. Here's how things work. Here's how the procedures go. Here's the way we want people to act. And then you look at it and you say, you know what? I know this is true, but I need this sentence approved by the very top of the organization. That sentence comes out and goes into the policy. If everything has to be approved by the very top of the organization, we have a very difficult organization to work for. So part of this, we heard before, give people a job and trust them to do what they need to do. Those descriptions, that's not, it doesn't have to be in the form of policy. That's all office manual stuff. And the more we can get people to buy in and agree, the more it's this joint thing, the less policy-like it becomes.
I love this. It's a real eye-opener for me. I love the idea that the policy is really an embodiment of your culture and your values as an organization, and not a contract. And that's a great way to think about it. If it's a contract, it's adversarial. If it's a policy, it's sort of this collective belief that we have, which was fantastic. Well, I mean, you did a great job as a workshop last year. It was such a good talk that we decided we would put you in the leadership track this year. I really appreciate you joining us as always. Thank you for all your help on this. And obviously, the world has a few years ahead of it rewriting policies for the digital age. So I'm glad that you're out there trying to support that effort and help people on it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Bye.